Welcome to Lore of Power, where the world's oldest myths become lessons in strategy. Each night we take one timeless principle of power and hide it inside a story the ancients told in the dark. Tonight, the patience to endure what cannot be rushed, and the resolve to act when the moment finally comes, through the lens of the birth of Wainamoinen from the Finnish kalevala. Settle in. Dim the lights. Let's begin. Here is tonight's idea. There are things in this life that will not be hurried. Not by will. Not by intelligence. Not by the fierceness of your wanting. Some things move only when they are ready, and the only question that remains is whether you will still be present when they are. Most people cannot bear this. We live in an age that has forgotten how to wait. We mistake motion for progress and silence for surrender. When the answer does not come quickly, we assume it will not come at all. We change course. We abandon what was almost ready. We walk away from the door 1 hour before it opens. And so the principle that matters tonight is this. Endure what cannot be rushed. Accumulate your readiness in the dark. Then when the moment finally arrives, do not wait for someone else to open the way. Act decisively, entirely on your own. This is harder than it sounds, because endurance without hope is one kind of difficulty, and self-initiated action after long suffering is another. Most people who manage the first have forgotten how to do the second. They wait so long that waiting becomes the shape of them. They grow into their patience the way a tree grows into stone, fused, immovable, no longer capable of choice. The principle asks you to hold both. To wait without becoming only the waiting. To act without having wasted the time that prepared you. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus, a man who knew something about confinement, said that freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the correct relationship to constraint. You cannot always choose your conditions. You can always choose your response to them. And when at last the conditions change, when the door becomes openable, you must be the one who opens it. Not because help will not come. Not because you are too proud to receive it. But because sometimes help will not come. And readiness that never becomes action is just a beautiful, useless thing. Tonight's myth is from the Kalevala, the ancient song poem of Finland, gathered from the mouths of wandering singers along the edge of forests that do not end. It is the first story. The story before all other stories. In it, a goddess falls from the sky and is swallowed by an ocean with no shore. She does not die, but she cannot move freely. She cannot rise. She cannot be born into her purpose. For 700 years she endures this. 700 years. And when she finally calls for help, when she sends her prayer upward into a sky that cannot yet hear her, the answer that comes is not the one she asked for. It is stranger than she expected. More beautiful. And it passes through her. The world is made from her endurance. The son she carries will become the first singer of the earth. But first he must choose to break his own way out. Listen, there was a time before time had a name. No sun had yet decided where to rise. No moon had chosen a path across the dark. The stars had not yet been thrown into their places. There was only the ether, vast, sourceless, breathing, and within it, a maiden who had lived there since before memory could reach. She was Ilmatar, daughter of the air, and she had been alone for longer than loneliness has words. Not sorrowful at first. Not desperate. Simply there. Existing in the way that a field of snow exists before anyone has walked through it. Complete in itself. Unmarked. Unhurried. But something in her grew restless. The way deep water grows restless before a storm arrives, not because the storm is already there, but because the water knows somehow that it is coming. She descended, not in anger, not in search of anything she could name. She simply let herself fall slowly, the way a leaf releases from a branch when it is ready. And the ocean received her. The sea was enormous in the way that only the first sea can be enormous, when there is nothing else yet to compare it to. No coastline to interrupt it. No horizon that promised anything beyond more water. Only the dark swells, one after another, rolling in every direction at once. She floated, and then the east wind found her. It came without warning, the way power so often comes, not announced, not invited, simply present and enormous. It churned the ocean into mountains of water. It struck the upper dark and scattered spray against whatever would one day become the stars. The waves grew white at their peaks, furious and cold. And in that chaos something transferred. The force of the storm and the beauty of the woman who could not escape it met in the way that iron meets fire. And something was kindled. She did not understand it yet. She only knew that she could no longer rise above the water. Something inside her had become heavier than the sea would hold. The storm slept. The waves softened. And still she could not rise. 700 years she swam. North, south, west, in all directions without rest. In no direction with purpose. Simply moving because to stop moving was to sink, and she could not sink, and she could not rise, and the horizon looked the same in every direction, and every year looked like the last. There is a particular kind of suffering that does not arrive all at once. It accumulates. The way that cold accumulates in a stone left out through winter, not hurting you when you first pick it up, but the longer you hold it, the more of your warmth it takes. 700 years. 9 lifetimes by the old reckoning. She wept, not the weeping of someone who has given up, but the weeping of someone who has held on so long that the holding itself has become a kind of grief. She called to Ukko, the god above gods, the ruler of the sky, and her words rose on the cold air. Take me back, or come to me. I cannot remain in this alone. She did not know it, but that prayer would be answered, only not in the way she asked, not from the direction she was watching, not in the shape she could have imagined. A creature was already coming. Small, dark-winged, deliberate, a duck crossing the face of the water, searching for a place to land. And Ilmatar, still carrying her 700-year weight, raised her knees above the surface of the sea. Not knowing why, only that it seemed like something the moment required. The duck circled. It flew east and found nothing. It flew west and the water gave no answer. North-south, only the flat moving dark of the ocean, only the ceaseless hiss of waves that had no shore. The duck needed ground and there was no ground. There was only Ilmatar, half submerged, her knees raised above the surface like 2 dark hills emerging from a drowned world. So the duck came down. It did not hesitate. It landed on her knees as if it had always known this place was there, as if the hills had been waiting under the water all along, made for precisely this arrival. And Ilmatar held still. This is worth pausing on, this particular quality of stillness. She had been tossed by storm winds for 700 years. She had been rolled and spun and swallowed and spat back. Every motion she had made until now had been made for her, forced upon her, the sea's decision and the wind's. But this stillness was chosen. She felt the weight of the bird settle on her knees, the small warm pressure of a living thing finding rest in her, and she did not flinch, did not shift, did not disturb what was beginning to take shape. There is a kind of power that looks like nothing from the outside. It does not announce itself. It does not move. It simply holds. The duck built its nest in the hollow of her knees. Wove it from whatever the sea offered, grass, reed, the memory of grass, the idea of a home. And then it laid its eggs. 6 of gold, 1 of iron, 7 in total, and the duck settled over them with the patience of something that knows exactly what it is doing, and Ilmatar held the weight of all 7 beneath the warmth of that small body, held the nest steady as the waves pushed and the deep cold pressed up from below. Days passed. The eggs grew warm, and then warmer than warm. Heat began to move through Ilmatar's knees like something waking up. A slow burn, then a real burn, The cold sea that had been her home for centuries could not stop it. The warmth climbed into her thighs, spread to her shoulders, became something she could not hold apart from herself any longer. She moved, not deliberately or perhaps deliberately, in the way that all great disruptions are both accident and inevitability at once. Her knees shifted, the nest tilted, and the 7 eggs tumbled from their place and fell into the sea. For a moment there was only the sound of the water receiving them. And then the eggs broke open. Not into loss, into everything. The lower halves of the shells became the earth, the cold curving floor that the world would stand on. The upper halves rose and became the sky, that vast dark bowl set over the rest like a lid over a still warm thing. The yellow of the yolk became the sun, and the white became the moon. The speckled inner surfaces scattered into stars. The dark matter became the clouds, which have been drifting ever since between the light and the cold, as if looking for somewhere to belong. Ilmatar had held still long enough. She had suffered the weight. She had provided the ground, unasked, without being told what it was for. And when she moved, when the long endurance finally shuddered and broke, it was not failure. It was the only way the world could be made. No one who watched, if there had been anyone watching, would have understood what they were seeing. A woman flinching. An accident in the dark. But there are moments when the whole of creation turns on a single night, shifted in cold water. And even this was not the end. Even this was not the birth that had been waiting. The eggs were gone. Whatever fragile architecture had been resting on her, the warmth, the weight, the small domestic miracle of it, had slipped away into the black beneath her, and she was alone again in the way she had always been alone, which is to say completely. You have known this failing. Not the loss of eggs, perhaps, but the loss of what the eggs meant, the sense that something was finally, at last, taking shape, and then the sudden return to nothing, to cold, to the same featureless dark you thought you had escaped. She did not scream. She had already spent her screams on Ukko, on the god above the heavens, on anyone who might have heard her from that high and distant throne. What came back to her instead was the only thing the ocean ever gives, more ocean. And so she swam, toward the east which offered no shore, toward the south which dissolved into the same gray middle distance, toward the west, toward the north, through every direction that exists and several that have no name, because when you have been swimming for 700 years, the compass begins to feel like a joke, a wheel that spins and returns you always to yourself. This is the thing that is not said often enough about long waiting. It is not peaceful. The stories make endurance sound like stillness, like a monk in quiet contemplation, like patience as a kind of beautiful suspended breath. But the truth is that endurance is motion with no destination, effort with no feedback, swimming when you cannot tell whether the shore is 1,000 years away or simply does not exist. The water mother did not rest. She could not rest. She was not waiting in the way you wait for a letter, or for news, or for a season to turn, sitting somewhere warm with a cup of tea, and the reasonable expectation that the waiting will one day be over. She was laboring. She was in travail, which is an old word and a harder word than it sounds, and it shares its root with a word for instrument of torture, 3 stakes bound together to which a person was once fixed, because the ones who named things understood that sustained effort at the edge of your capacity is not neutral, is not calm, is not the serene kind of endurance that gets written on the walls of temples. It costs something. 700 years of cost. 9 ages of cost, the kind measured not in calendars but in the slow erosion of who you were when you began, the accumulated weight of unanswered motion, the quiet violence of remaining conscious through a duration that was never designed to be endured. And still, this is the part that matters, still, she had not broken into pieces. The eggs had broken. She had not. There is a difference, and it is the whole of the lesson, and it is harder than it sounds. Because there will come a moment, there always comes a moment, when what you were building falls, when the thing you thought was finally coming together shatters on some dark floor you cannot even see, and the question that moment asks of you is simply, are you the egg, or are you the one who carried it? She was the one who carried it. She swam. The world above her, because there was a world above her now, built from the pieces she had unknowingly given shelter to. Skies and moons and the yellow gold of a sun she could not reach, turned slowly in the new light. And inside her, in the deep interior of her long labor, something older and stranger than sky or moon continued its own patient work. Still unborn, still waiting for a door that had not yet been opened. He had tried the courteous way. He had asked in the manner of one who trusts that the world is generous, that a word spoken into the dark will find the ear it was meant for. He had called to the moon. The moon did not answer. He had called to the sun, that same sun which had been made, in some ancient moment before his memory, from the yellow yolk of an egg that fell and shattered on the floor of the world. The sun did not answer. He had called to the great bear, the old turning star that sailors trust, the patient fire that holds its place while all the lesser lights wheel around it. The great bear offered him nothing. And now something in Wainamoinen went still. Not the stillness of defeat. He had lived inside defeat for 30 years, for 60 seasons of cold and dark, and he knew its texture intimately, knew the way it presses on the chest like a stone that is slightly too heavy to lift but not heavy enough to justify surrender. This was a different stillness. This was the stillness that comes when a man finally understands that help is not coming. Not because the moon is cruel. Not because the sun is indifferent. Not because the great bear has forgotten him. Perhaps they simply cannot hear what is asked of them. Perhaps the walls of this place are too thick. Perhaps there are limits to what even old luminaries can reach with their light. It does not matter why. What matters is the understanding. And the understanding was this. There is a door. The door is closed. No one is going to open it for you. So, he gathered what he had, and what he had was only himself, his thumb, which he pressed like a key into the frame, his toe, which he set like a lever against the threshold of the world, his fingers, which found the edge of things and began to pull. This is not a feat recorded in the songs of heroes. There is no glory here, no flashing sword, no great antagonist who falls. It is only a man pressing outward against the place where the inside becomes the outside, against the membrane between what has not happened yet and what must now happen. He pressed. The darkness gave nothing. He pressed again. And here is what the songs do not quite say, but what the songs imply if you listen carefully. It was not one great effort that opened the door. It was the 30 years that opened the door. The 30 years were not wasted time. They were not a punishment, not an oversight, not a cosmic error that left a child unborn in the dark while the rest of creation was being arranged around him. They were the accumulation. Every season of stillness had made him more himself. Every turning of the dark water above him had refined in him some quality that has no name in any language, except the name we give to what is left after everything unnecessary has been removed. He pressed again, and this time the hinge of the world moved. Only slightly. Only enough to let in a sliver, not of light yet, not of air exactly, but of the possibility of light, of the idea of air, of the vast implication of an opening where a moment before there had been only wall. He did not rest. He did not pause to consider whether this was real. He pushed through the sliver the way water pushes through a crack in stone, not forcefully, not urgently, but with the certainty of something that has nowhere else to go, and all the time that was given it already spent, already used, already transformed into the only thing that could have opened the door. Himself. The outside began. He tumbled into the light the way a word falls into silence after long thought. Not arriving so much as completing. The cold water received him. He swam. Above him the sky was already old, already furnished, the sun a golden arc the goddess had made from the broken egg, the moon a paler lantern hung in its place, the stars scattered like grain across the dark fields above the world. Someone had already done the work of heaven. He swam among the islands she had shaped with her turning body, the bays and inlets traced by her resting head, the hidden reefs made by her back when she had floated, unknowing, for years before she had known what she was doing. The world was not waiting for him. It had been built before his eyes opened. And still he was here. He rose to the surface and breathed the first breath any breathing thing had drawn on the surface of the new world, and the air was cold and tasted of nothing yet, because nothing had yet lived here long enough to leave its scent upon the wind. He floated on his back and looked up. The sun the goddess had made moved slowly across the enormous sky. 30 years in the womb of the water. 700 years the goddess in the open sea before him. And yet here, in the reckoning of the newly made world, it was still only the beginning of the morning of the first day. This is what the myth knows that the impatient do not. The time spent waiting does not subtract from the life that follows. It does not delay the story. It is the story. Wainamoinen had not wasted his 30 winters in the dark. He had been becoming. And when he at last reached the shore and felt land firm beneath his feet for the first time, felt the rock the way a prisoner feels a wall and finds in it not confinement but the comfort of something real and solid, he did not fall weeping in gratitude. He did not look back at the water that had held him. He stood. He was already who he was. The old, trusty singer of the world. Steady before his first step. Ready before his first song. The things he had asked for and not been given, the moon, the bare star, the sun, the mercy of any outside hand, those unanswered prayers had shaped him into the only instrument capable of what came next. A man who had been rescued would have been grateful. A man who had rescued himself was something else. He was the principle. He was the proof that endurance, when it is long enough and patient enough and finally desperate enough to become decisive, does not merely survive, it arrives as something new. The world does not always open for you when you knock. Sometimes the door holds. Sometimes the moon does not answer. Sometimes the sun does not answer. Sometimes the great star of the northern sky does not answer. And in that silence, in that long, cold, lightless silence where no help is coming, something either breaks or something becomes. Wainamoinen became. He stood on the shore of the world that had been made without him and began to make his portion of it, and the sea behind him held the shape of nothing, only the quiet spreading rings where a man had finally, after all the waiting there had ever been, broken through. And what the sea held in those rings was not absence. It was everything that waiting had made of him. There is a kind of person who mistakes stillness for surrender, who looks at someone enduring the long dark and thinks they have given up. But giving up looks like drifting. Giving up has no direction. The water mother swam toward the east and also southward, toward the west and also northward. She was not drifting. She was carrying. And Wainamoinen, 30 winters folded inside himself, was not sleeping. He was becoming capable of the exact action that would one day be required. This is the principle the myth is asking you to hold. Not patience as passivity. Not endurance as resignation. But the long, faithful accumulation of a force that has nowhere yet to go, and the courage, when the moment finally offers itself, to go without permission. He called to the moon. The moon did not answer. He called to the sun. The sun did not answer. He called to the great bear turning cold above the water. Silent. And then, and this is the part that matters, he did not call again. He understood in the way that only the long-waiting understand, that the door would not be opened from the outside. That no celestial body, no god, no favorable wind was going to do for him what only he could do for himself. So he did it. He pressed his thumb against the gate. That is the whole of it if you want it in a single gesture. When what you are waiting for does not come, you become it. There will be seasons in your life that feel like the inside of the water. Seasons where the light does not reach. Where the thing you were meant to do has not yet found its shape. Where every direction you swim looks the same. Do not mistake those seasons for failure. They are not failure. They are the cost of becoming something the world has not yet seen. The eggs broke. The cosmos fell out of the breaking. And still he had to wait because the world being made is not the same as the world being ready for you. Both things are true at once. The world was being made, and he was being made, and neither could be rushed. But eventually, and this is the promise the myth leaves you, eventually the readiness inside you will meet the readiness outside you, and the door will be thinner than you feared, and your thumb will be stronger than you knew. Rest now in that, not in the striving, not in the waiting, but in the knowledge that both of those things, held together with enough patience and enough will, make a person who can break through into a world that is genuinely glad they did.